everyone, I'm the Enforcer, and today I'm going to talk about how a country like Ukraine can go up against the Russians and do incredibly well while having an incredibly smaller military and also a smaller military budget. Now, something that a lot of people do not consider when they think about war is that it does cover an area of land, and let me explain what I mean by that. The Russians may have a military of 1,000,000 men strong, and the Ukrainians have a military of around 270,000 men. But if Russia goes to war, all 1,000,000 of those soldiers cannot go to Ukraine and start fighting along the front line wherever it may be, because you can only put so many soldiers into one place. That means that even if the Russians have 1,000,000 strong military in Ukraine, there's only so many soldiers they can put into that war before they run out of room. And now I'm going to introduce y'all to something that is really weird that most of y'all probably never heard about before, which is troop density. Of course, I'm using Wikipedia as a source for this because it's the easiest one for me to show. But troop density talks about how many soldiers there are in a certain area. And this little article will go on to explain that as weapons have gotten more and more lethal, the troop density has gotten less and less. And so the deadlier the weapon, the less there are troops in a single area. So what you can kind of get as an idea from this is that the Russians, although they have 1,000,000 soldiers, they can't really use 1,000,000 soldiers in this war. The front line is not long enough, not large enough, for a 1,000,000-man army to actually be used. And that's why we don't see the Russians pouring in these extra hundreds of thousands of soldiers into this current war like a lot of people would want to believe. And it's because if they did that, they wouldn't be increasing the efficiency of their units. They wouldn't be pushing any more, I guess you could say, cities, towns, front lines more effectively. All they would be doing is putting more people into a kill zone, and it would end up incredibly bad for the Russians. They would just lose more resources and manpower with no gain whatsoever. And what's interesting enough about the entire aspect of troop density is that it just doesn't just apply to infantrymen. It also applies to air forces and navies. That's why a lot of people have been saying, why haven't the Russians been using their air force like we thought they would? We thought they'd just have aircraft flying all over Ukraine. And that's because there's a certain amount of room, a certain perimeter, I guess you could say, that's given around a military aircraft of several dozen miles sometimes. And so for that reason, you can only have so many aircraft flying into Ukraine from the Russian Air Force before there's not enough room for any more of them without the fear of them getting shot down without accomplishing anything. And so while the Ukrainians have a smaller military and a smaller air force, it is large enough to protect the amount of land they're fighting on. And also, the Russians cannot bring any more than what the Ukrainians already have. And so the forces are pretty much evenly matched. There are some differences, however. For example, the Russians do outnumber the Ukrainians in artillery pieces. That's because you don't really have to have a lot of concerns about troop density on a front line with artillery, because you can position it anywhere behind the front lines and just move them around wherever you wish. So artillery, they can be outnumbered in, but the actual effectiveness of their infantry and throwing more into the situation, it just cannot happen. That's also why you'll see throughout a lot of history, smaller countries were usually able to win over larger ones, like Finland in the Winter War against the Soviet Union. They would end up, although signing a white peace and giving up a little bit of their land, they would survive that war and inflict an ungodly amount of casualties onto the Russians, well, specifically the Soviets at that time. And that was an instance of a smaller country winning against a larger one. For another example, the Greeks and the Italians. The Greeks were able to hold off the Italians for an incredibly long time before the Germans came down. Now, technically, the Italians had a larger military than Greece that was fairly more competent, at least on paper. We all know that in World War II, the Italians never really panned out in effectiveness. But however, they could only put so many soldiers up against the Greeks before they ran out of room. And because of that, the front lines largely stayed stagnant. Greek troops were about as well equipped and as well trained as their Italian counterparts, and considering that they were almost going up against each other in pretty fair proportions, there was really no way for the Italians to ever make ground, although they were the larger and more powerful country out of the two. Much like we would see with the bombshell in the room, China and Taiwan. While China may have an impressive air force, an impressive navy, and an impressive ground force, the possibility of them crossing the Taiwan Strait, landing in Taiwan, and then being able to keep their troop density spread out wide enough and their aircraft density to actually overwhelm the Taiwanese is a whole other question. And so you can kind of see that while a country may have an unlimited amount of weapons, supplies, soldiers, whatever it may be, eventually you just run out of room to use it all. A lot of superpowers in the world, well, at least supposed superpowers, we know that the Russian Federation isn't one of those really anymore. But out of the three, I guess you could call competing powers in the world, the United States, Russia, and China, all three of these countries have militaries that are about larger than 1 million men. And the reason is because these superpowers and their militaries are at such a size that they're prepared to fight over a front line that could be the entire length of Europe from north to south, or something similar. And so even then, the entire size of the military revolves around how many soldiers would be needed to cover a certain amount of front line. I hope y'all have enjoyed this little video. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I try to make videos like these as much as I can, and hopefully y'all found something enjoyable or informational about this. And so with that, I will see you all in the next one. Y'all have a great day, and take care.